Welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. When you're ready to transform your sales for today's transforming market, we've got you covered with your host, the queen of cold calling and founder of Salesology, award-winning author, speaker, sales trainer, and coach, Wendy Weiss.
Hi, welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And I'm your host, Wendy Weiss. I am the founder of Salesology, creator of the Salesology prospecting method, and I'm also known as the queen of cold calling. And today, my very special guest is Todd Bermont. He is the vice president of sales at Solarcraft, and he is a Houston-based high technology sales and business development leader. He has over 30 years of sales management, business development, and sales experience in data center design, build, IT, mission critical power, infrastructure, professional services, and SaaS. He has been recruited and hired 6 times by former colleagues, and his sales management accomplishments include achieving record sales and profit each year for the first full 3 years as vice president of sales for Solarcraft, and growing the original equipment manufacturer division of APC from $10 million annually to over $100 million in just 4 years. As the director of business development and marketing for Lead Technologies, he helped the company grow from $55 million in sales to over $100 million in just 2 years. So today we are talking to someone who knows what he is talking about. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you so much, Wendy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you are here. So let's start at the beginning, where I always start. What is your background? How did you come to be the vice president of sales for Solarcraft and everything else you've done in your entire life?
Well, I'll try to make it concise. I realized at a very, very early age that I loved selling. One of my first jobs, and going all the way back to high school, was selling video recorders. And now I'm going to date myself a little bit, but back in the day when the remote control actually had a wire attached to it. So that'll tell you how long ago I was selling video recorders. But I just loved it because at the time, not only was I making minimum wage, which was $3.10 an hour back then, but what was great, every time I sold a video recorder, they would take a $20 bill out of the cash register and hand it to me. They called it a spiff back then. And when I sold the big screen TV, they handed me $50 cash out of the register, because back then the big screen TVs cost like $5,000 back then. So that kind of the whole idea of instant gratification and getting paid for performance really intrigued me going all the way back to high school. And that's what got me involved in a career in sales. So I went to the University of Illinois, and for a good portion of my career was in the data center world, and in a lot of that world, both from a power perspective, selling devices called uninterruptible power supplies that keep your computers up and running when the power goes out, to today. Now I sell solar power systems along with uninterruptible power supplies as well for rugged environments. And it's a funny story on how I wound up at Solarcraft, because my nickname here is actually the wrong Todd. And to show you how the world works in mysterious ways sometimes. So I had a position with a company out of New York, and I was reached out to by the owner of Solarcraft, and he was looking for somebody to add to his sales team. And the way he found me, so I worked for this company a few years earlier called the Evolve, and they still do design, build data centers, and the person that I was hired to replace at Evolve, his name was also Todd, but his last name started with a G, and so at Evolve, there happened to be a consultant that helped out with the business, an IT type consultant. And this consultant happened to live in the same subdivision as the owner of Solarcraft. And so the owner of Solarcraft reached out to this consultant to ask her, do you know of any folks that would be a good salesperson that I could go out and hire? And she said, well, I used to work with this gentleman by the name of Todd, but I can't remember his last name. And the person she was referring to was the Todd whose last name was a G that I had replaced, but she couldn't remember his last name. And the owner of Solarcraft tends to be a little impatient at times. So what he did after talking to her was he went to her LinkedIn profile and looked for all the Todds that she was connected to that happened to work for the company Evolve, which he figured it'd only be one. Well, my profile came up first because my last name is Todd Bermont, so B comes before G. And so he looked at my profile and said, yeah, I think this would be a good fit, potentially. So he reached out to me for an interview. And then as I was driving to the interview, as the story goes, this consultant that had given him the first name of Todd, she called him and said, I found it. I've got the last name. It's Todd G. And Daryl then realized, ooh, I'm interviewing the wrong Todd. But he gave me the interview anyway, and the rest is history, so to speak. And so I was hired on my first 3 months as a salesperson heading up business development for new markets, but they rapidly liked what they saw and also learned more of my background of having been a VP at other places. And the owner wanted to take the company in a new direction. So then he offered me the opportunity to take the VP position. And so I've been there ever since July of 2021 in the VP slot. So kind of a long-winded answer to your question.
Well, that is a great story. And so from now on, I will also refer to you as the wrong Todd. But the right Todd for this interview. And so I'm going to share with all of our listeners that you and I met on LinkedIn, and I reached out to you about our services because we are sales trainers and we teach business development. And you basically said to me, oh, no, we don't need any help with that. We're just selling like hotcakes. And so then I said to you, well, that's interesting. Would you come on my podcast and talk about that? So here we are. And one of the questions that I asked you in preparation for doing this interview was, tell me about some wins that you and your sales team have had in the past year. And I'm just going to read your answer. Sales are currently up 60% year over year, which is a third consecutive record year for a 30-year-old company. Won several multi-million-dollar orders. So, virtual gold star for you and your sales team.
Thank you.
Give us some tips. How did you do that? Give us some do's and some don'ts.
Well, it's really a few key things that have helped generate this success. Number one, it's really important to have the right people in place. So it's interesting, as I was putting together my budget for 2025 and looking at the headcount I started with in 2021 and the headcount that I was at when I was putting together my budget. So in 2021, I had a headcount of 10, including a person in marketing. And prior to Monday of last week, when we started 2 new people, but prior to Monday of last week, I still had a head count of 10, but yet we were generating more than triple the sales. So, but an interesting thing though is of the original 10 that I inherited, only 3 remain today. So putting the right people in place is absolutely critical for one. Number two, having the right strategy. It takes just as much time to call on a decision maker that's going to buy 1 unit of something as it does to call on a decision maker that's going to buy hundreds of units. So one of the things that I've really tried to instill in the team is the concept of leverage. And going after those decision makers that are going to buy multiples rather than singles. And then also
Can we just stop here and would you repeat that? I am so happy to hear you say that.
Yes, calling on people, decision makers that are going to buy many units, not just 1 unit, because at the end of the day, it takes the same 7 to 11 touches to sell to a person that's going to buy 1 unit as it does to sell to a person that's going to buy hundreds. So for that same amount of time and effort, and in fact, in some cases, it's more effort to sell to the person that's only going to buy 1. So one of the things that we really taught the team was to learn the concept of leverage and focusing on those folks that are going to buy multiples, not singles.
Well, I love that you said that. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So, and any other tips? Because I interrupted you. My apologies.
No, that's quite all right. Yeah. I'm a big believer too that it's a lot easier to sell more to an existing customer than it is to go out and get a new customer. So we deal with a lot of very large customers in the oil and gas world, folks like Kinder Morgan, Energy Transfer, and companies like that. And but these are national companies, in some respects global, and but yet we only were selling to the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more opportunity just within these accounts, and being already on the approved vendors list and everything else. One of the things I emphasize to the team is let's see if we can grow our footprint within our existing accounts, and with some of our biggest accounts over the last 3 years, we've grown anywhere from 5-fold to 10-fold the amount of revenue within those accounts. So having that focus has helped, but then being strategic as well, going after new markets and new customers that can leverage what we've already done for our existing customers. That's another way we've been able to grow the business. And then finally, I can't overemphasize the importance of putting in the right compensation plan. The very first thing I did when I became VP of Sales back in July of 21 was to blow up the existing comp plan. And well, I shouldn't use that word, but get rid of the existing comp plan and put in a new compensation plan, and one that was much more focused on pay for performance. And also a unique thing that most companies, or a lot of companies, don't do that I have done is I've actually sat down with the salespeople and jointly developed the compensation plan with them. And so each salesperson kind of has a unique comp plan that's really custom tailored to what motivates that person the most. So in doing that, the salespeople have more ownership in how they get paid. They don't feel like they're being forced into something. And as a result, it's really generated much more motivated salespeople that have substantially increased their performance.
That's very interesting. I've never heard that before. Can you share with us a little bit? How does that conversation go when you're speaking with that sales rep?
So one of the things, so the comp plans that I put together have multiple components. One of them is just a flat percentage of sales. So that really doesn't waver too much. But then I like to, a big part of the comp plan is what I call kickers. And so kickers being special money if you close a certain account over a certain amount, or if you close a certain amount of new orders over the given quarter. That in some cases for a new account, you might get $1,500 or $2,000, depending on the size of that new account, or for hitting 1 point something million in the quarter, they might get a $7,500 bonus. But then some of the efforts are based on individual sales versus, while I did get rid of the team concept when I became vice president of sales, I kind of brought it back on a case by case basis, salespeople working together as a team, which actually is an important component of how we've grown sales as well. Is instead of having the salespeople compete against each other, in a lot of cases, I have them teaming together on large accounts to help increase the business. And but some comp plans, we've done the kickers based on individual performance because that's the way the salesperson wanted it. Where other accounts, we based them based on team performance because that's how others wanted it. So that's an example how we kind of customized it with feedback from the team.
Okay, well, I really like that a lot. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Yeah, so I want to ask you, because when I asked you how you got sales to go up 60% year over year, third consecutive record year, the first thing that you mentioned was hiring the right people. Now, in preparation for this interview, one of the questions I also asked you was, what drives you crazy about managing a sales team? And you said, hiring is the number one problem. I've hired and fired 4 salespeople and 1 marketing person in the last year.
That's true.
So,
yeah. Unfortunately, that's true. And it's one of the things I hate to do the most. There's nothing worse than having to let a person go. And but it's interesting. One of the things I didn't talk about at the beginning of this podcast that I've done in my career was I did for 1 year do day trading. It was a dream of mine, and back in the year 2000, I decided to chase a dream and go into day trading. And one of the things that they teach you in trading when you're trading stocks and bonds and commodities and stuff like that is that the market is always right, and that you can't fight the market, and you want to cut your losses quickly. So when you're in a trade that starts to go south in a hurry, you're taught when it comes to trading, get out of that trade as quickly as possible so you can preserve your capital and preserve your time for the next day. And I've really kind of applied that same principle when it comes to hiring people. That hiring is really tough, and it's been lately, ever since COVID, it's been especially tough finding people that really have the right work ethic and that are motivated to succeed. It's been very tough to find. And one of the things that I've employed being a manager is, if I hired a bad employee and I made a bad decision, number one, own up to it, admit it that it was a bad decision. Then number 2, get out of that decision as fast as possible so I don't demoralize and bring down the rest of the team, and then save our budget to go after somebody better that can help the team moving forward.
so how do you determine, as you're going through the process of recruiting, interviewing, potentially hiring someone, what are you looking for that's going to tell you, yes, I think this person would be a good fit? And then on the other end of the spectrum, what is it that makes you say, no, I made a mistake, I'm going to cut my losses?
Well, the interview process is much like the sales process. And if they're not doing the basics right during the interview process, then that's a good clue that they're not going to do it right during the sales process. And a few of the mistakes that I made this year was not following my gut and not following my own instinct during the interview process, because uh, pretty much every person that I hired and fired this year that I had to let go was people that were referred to me. And normally referrals, you should have a much better track record with referrals, but in my case, it didn't prove out. And it was interesting because with each referral, there was a red flag or two that came up during the interview process, but I kind of forgave those red flags because the person came so highly recommended by somebody. And finally, after the fourth mistake this year, I've said to myself, I am going to start listening to my gut again. I'm going to follow my principles. And if they don't do a good job through the interview process demonstrating basic sales skills, then I am not going to extend an offer to them. And so as a result, it's taken me a lot longer now to find the right people. But I just want to try to learn from some of the mistakes. And then, as far as how do I know when I hired the wrong person? At the end of the day, everybody in sales is measured based off of results. And so the number one result you look for is what kind of revenue are they generating? What kind of sales are they generating? Now, for new salespeople, it's not fair to expect revenue day one, and you certainly have to be patient with how long it'll take for somebody to get ramped up. But the number one, from my perspective, the number one leading indicator of how effective they are going to be at sales is how many quotes are they doing. So if you don't have a lot of quotes in your pipeline, you're not going to get a lot of sales. That's the bottom line. So for new salespeople, sure, in the ideal world, I'd like them to close a lot of business out of the gate. But at a minimum, I'd like to see that we're generating good quote activity. And then if the quote activity isn't there, then the next indicator is activity that they, how many meetings are they going on? How many sales calls are they making? And we have a very good CRM system that I strongly encourage everybody in my team to work with. And so I look to the CRM, then if there's not quota activity, to see, well, do we at least have the right sales activity going on? And usually when there's not the right quota activity, usually you find out there's not the right sales activity either. And then that's when you have to say, all right, this person's not just not cutting it. They're not putting in a solid effort. They're not doing what's required. They're just not cutting it.
So what is your time frame for this?
That's a good question, because one person I fired after 2 weeks. That was the shortest period of time. And then the longest period of time was I gave a person 6 months and still after 6 months, it just wasn't happening. So it's fallen anywhere in between 2 weeks and 6 months.
Okay. So I'm curious. Tell me if this is something that you do, because it's something that I do, and I also recommend to all of my clients when I'm trying to hire. I want to know if somebody is coachable. And so one of the things that I'll do is I will give them a script or do some kind of role play with them or something to see what they do. And I almost don't care what it is they do, but I will then give them some corrections. Do this instead of that. Or, work it this way instead of that way. And then I'll tell them, go home and practice. And then the next time I see them, have they actually taken to heart and implemented what I've recommended? Or are they going to, well, that's not how we did it at my last job. Or, well, don't you think it'd be better if we did it this other way? I don't want to work with those people. I want to work with people that are coachable. And that's one of my key indicators. And I'm wondering if there's something similar to that you do in your hiring process that helps.
That's a great idea, and I haven't looked at it from that perspective, of looking at how coachable the individual is and actually giving them things to prove that out. So I like that idea. As far as things that I've done, one of the things that I look for is what kind of plan of attack would they have approaching it. One of the things that I'm now implementing is that prior to hiring people, I'm asking for a 90-day business plan to see, so from your perspective, how would you dive in and what would you do to become successful right out of the gate? So that's one of the new things I'm starting to do to try to weed out folks a little bit and to try to get a better idea of the thought process moving forward, because basically being a small company, we don't have the luxury of having a multi-month training program. Basically, we give them a 1-week training program where we sit them down with some of the technical folks, marketing, inside sales, project management. We give them a taste of the company, if you will, and then on the final day of that first week, we sit down and do a strategic planning session and map out the next 90 days. And really, it's those that follow that strategic plan are the ones that succeed, and the ones that don't typically don't.
Truer words were never spoken. Yeah. So you have a book. I'm switching gears here. You have a book, Cognitive Selling. Tell us about your book.
So it's a big belief of mine that sales is a mental game, and that we have to be at the top of our games mentally, and this applies to somebody like me that's well north of 30 years of experience, or somebody that only has a few days of experience. Years ago, I used to listen to, again, I'm going to date myself, but I used to listen to a lot of trainings on tape by a gentleman by the name of Tom Hopkins. That was a sales mentor of mine, virtually, if you will, over the years. And one of the big points that he made is that many salespeople fail because they haven't bought what they're selling. And that is so true that if you yourself or if your team does not believe in what they're doing, they're not going to succeed. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that when I've worked for companies, like today, working for Solarcraft, I honestly believe we have the best quality product and the best value. No, we're not the cheapest dollar by any means. There will always be somebody cheaper on bid day, but I honestly believe we provide the best solutions in the market for what we do and the best overall value for the life cycle of that solution. And it's so critical that as sales leaders that you believe in what you're doing and that the salespeople fully believe in it. And if the salesperson would not buy what they're selling, then get that person off the team.
Okay. So cognitive selling is about fill in the blank.
So cognitive selling, it's all about being at the top of your game from a mental perspective when it comes to sales. That's what it's all about. And it's also we go through a lot of information about how you can relate better to your customers through the mental aspect as well, and to prospects through mental aspects as well. So how to communicate subconsciously to the customers, how to increase your overall success rate. But the whole gist of the book, though, is being at the top of your game from a mental perspective and communicating to your customers to how they think as well.
Oh, yeah. So I'm definitely picking up a copy. And so if people want to connect with you, Todd, where can they find you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm connected to, it's got to be over 3,000 people now. So that's certainly the best place to connect with me.
Okay, wonderful. And so if you want to connect with Todd, as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, the link to Todd's LinkedIn profile is in the show notes. Go to the show notes, click on the link, connect with Todd. You'll be glad you did. That's how I met Todd. I'm glad I did. And so, Todd, one more question, because this has been such a great conversation. Would you put your hand over your heart and promise me that you will come back at some point in the future and we'll keep talking about sales?
I would love to.
Okay, good. And he's got his hand over his heart. So, yeah, you have been listening to Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders with my special guest, Todd Bermont. He is the Vice President of Sales at Solarcraft. And if you have found value in listening to today's podcast, then please think about one business owner, one sales leader, one entrepreneur, somebody that you know that you think would also find value in listening to this podcast. And please do share the link with them. And until we meet again, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, really large bills.
You've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. Be sure to follow so that you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share it with your friends. Tune in every week for more exciting insights and wisdom on transforming sales. And until next time, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, very large bills.